As soon as the little live button comes up, it says you
Oh,
are live. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us again this week for the Weekly Roundtable. I am one of your hosts, Frank Johnson, otherwise known as Bigfoot, because I got a big giant cast on my leg. With joining me tonight right now is Michael Vasquez, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, New York's only true independent, honest journalist. Tonight's going to be an interesting show. You may notice by the title underneath, I have a guest that's going to be with me in the studio this evening. But the 20-minute drive to the studio, he left 10 minutes before we were supposed to go live. So he's running late, needless to say. We know that we are going to be getting a couple of visits later this evening from some other prominent guests. We'll keep them nameless. We're right now waiting for Mike Marshall to show up. But in the interim, while it's just my good friend Vass and I, Mike, how are you and what the hell is going on?
this has been a crazy year. See, people don't always realize all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and it's like any other business. Honestly, doing this is a business. You're spending 60, 80 hours a week to make it all work. Hey, Dan.
I
Oh my
told you
God.
somebody was going to be stopping by, ladies and gentlemen. Our good buddy Dan was good guy.
What's
What's
up,
up, Dan?
fellas? How's it
No,
going,
it's
guys?
always good to see you, Dan.
Well, I
And
wanted to stop by for a few minutes. I got a campfire going outside, but I wanted to say hi anyway for a few minutes.
Well, we
Okay.
appreciate that. I texted Dan a little while ago. I says, "Can you join us?" And he texts back a picture of a campfire. So I pulled up a quick video for the Yule log on YouTube and sent him back the text. I was like, "Yeah, well, we got a fireplace in the studio. Don't be showing off to me."
Hey, how
It's a
you
good name
feeling,
for
Frank?
Right now, mentally, I'm not as loopy as I thought I was going to be. Vass and I were just talking about it off camera. It seems that they probably didn't keep me under quite long enough for me to have too many ill effects from it, and because I have such horrendous sleep apnea, they probably tried to just get me as borderline unconscious as possible,
Yeah.
to make sure that they could bring me back, because it's a complicated thing doing surgery on me. And I came out. I just barely remember waking up and getting thrown in a wheelchair and getting my ass thrown out of the hospital. I remember the ride home. I remember getting out of the car. I remember everything. It's just
Yeah.
right now, very fortunately, they gave me a pretty good horse-sized dose of nerve blocker into this tree trunk I call a leg. And I can't feel anything in the foot at all right now. So I'm
What did they do to? What did you have to have done?
back in July, I was at work and I was loading up a bunch of equipment back into one of our work trucks, and I was carrying a 24-foot ladder. And as I was sidestepping, like crab crawling, I stepped into an open floor drain that was 12 inches wide at the top, went down and tapered into 6 inches. My foot nosedived into the floor drain.
Oh wow.
I rolled forward, fell across the ladder, and my weight broke the ankle. I sheared a bunch of tendons and ligaments in the ankle.
Oh, bad.
And this was July. And because this is a workers' comp situation, you have to go through the minimum things first before they do the maximum things. And 5 or 6 months of therapy on my foot, and then it turned out, oh, you also have a spinal injury that
Oh, wow.
happened from this. I wound up with a decompression, a herniated disc due to decompression.
Wow.
So they had to do that. Then they finally send me in for an MRI, and they said, "Oh, by the way, there's no ligaments and tendons in your foot. We should operate on that." I was like,
Oh,
"Well, that
good.
was like 9 months ago. Wouldn't that would have been par for the course?" At first, the only thing they told me in the hospital was that I broke a bone in my foot. They didn't tell me that all the rest of this stuff was damaged.
Wow.
Because all they did was an X-ray. So now I have this surgery. So it's a month that I'm on a knee scooter. So no trips to the range for me. I can go to the indoor range and have somebody else carry all my stuff in and out and just sit at the bench and shoot. But I can't do any outdoor stuff for at least a month. I'm going to be in therapy for a month after that at least. Well, it's a month in a month in the scooter, a month in a boot, and then a month of rehab at least.
Wow.
Before I get a conditional idea of what level of disability I'm going to be listed at, because no matter what you do with this kind of injury, you're never ever going to be 100%.
Yeah.
So me even going back to my old job, and my day job is awesome. I love my day job. I work with an awesome group of guys. It's a family-owned company. It's a great schedule. It's convenient to the house. If I need something, boom, it's there. It's not a it's not a crappy place at all. It's awesome.
Well,
And I'm just afraid that this is going to prevent me from doing what I was doing, because the nature of my injury is the work I do. A lot of it is required two men on opposing ladders carrying very heavy, large objects.
yeah.
And if I don't have any stability in my back or my foot and I fall off a ladder, I'm taking the other guy with me.
Yeah.
And I will never live with hurting somebody, because of my own negligence or stupidity or anything. So, I have to find out what I can do within the company as an individual, that if I should happen to drop again or something happens, it's only me,
Yeah.
not somebody else. But time will tell. And I just want to get back to some sense of normalcy. This is going to be like a year and a half out of my life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a pain in the ass,
Huh.
but it is what it is. Now, what happened, Vass? I didn't want to cut you off, but we got Dan's only going to be in for a short while tonight.
No, that's fine.
And I know that we have two Michael Marshalls waiting in the wings. There's one of them now. Mr. Marshall, thanks for joining us in. Now, Dan, what happened? You were supposed to be on Newsmax this evening.
Yeah, they got overloaded with a bunch of stories, so I got bumped until Monday. So I'll be going on Monday night with Jen Pellegrino. I forget the name of her show. Shoot. Anyway, Jen Pellegrino. I'm sure everybody's seen Jen Pellegrino on Newsmax. So I'll be talking with her on Monday at 9 p.m. about the Washington State so-called assault weapons ban and what's going on with that. I got some new information from breaking news right now from Second Amendment Foundation Firearms Policy Coalition. They just submitted what do you call it? Preliminary injunctions.
Mm-hmm.
And Gun Owners of America just today won a preliminary injunction on assault weapons ban in Illinois. So we're doing good. So I have high hopes for Washington State.
Well, I don't understand how Washington State would even attempt to do this. Forget about going through an executive order, but legislatively, how would they even bother trying to attempt this when the language in Bruin clearly states about firearms of common use?
I know. And you know why? And they're doing the same thing New York does. They know they're going to lose. They know they're going against the Constitution, but they do it anyway because they can hold the people up in court. They can hold this stuff up in court for years. Bruin started in, I think, 2016. It took almost 7 years to get that thing all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the meantime, people were restricted. Now the Concealed Carry Improvement Act in New York is doing the same thing. They're working its way up through the courts, and technically stuff is still on the books until it gets completed at the Supreme Court level. So they know they're doing. They know they can't win, but they know that if they keep putting these pieces of legislation into place, that they can continue to just play the game in court and keep people restricted as long as they want. We have no choice.
This is why we have to have some sort of civil recourse against the individual politicians that try to do this stuff, because as long as they can go into the public coffers and use public funds and public money to strip away our rights, they're going to continue doing this. If they start being penalized, saying, by the way, you violated the Constitution when you voted for that piece of legislation. You violated the Constitution when you wrote it or you passed it. Now you're going to be sued civilly and have to pay recompense for what you did to the people.
They should be held accountable.
Keep happening.
Personally. They should be personally held accountable monetarily.
Exactly. And then that's when it's going to stop. I mean, I always had an argument like, if ATF decides that they want to file suit against you, they want to prosecute you criminally for something, for say, I don't know, now making something illegal that was legal for 13 years and then rewriting a rule out of out of thin air, they can prosecute you to the end of the earth. And it doesn't matter how much time they spend, it doesn't matter how much money they spend. But if you're one of these poor suckers that can't afford an attorney and you're being prosecuted maliciously, because I'm looking at it as a malicious prosecution, you only have a certain amount of money that you're going to be able to expend. And if you have to go for a public defender, the state is not going to give you an unlimited amount of funds to defend yourself with.
Right.
So they're using our money to prosecute us while restraining our ability to use our own resources to defend ourselves. And until and unless these people are held accountable in their pocketbook, because it's not even going to be a matter of holding them accountable at the ballot box. Not when you have a 93% re-election rate against, with existing politicians. Unless they have a term limit and they're going to get out of there, they get re-elected until they die. Unless we hold these people accountable civilly, or we pass some sort of legislation that allows us, or if there is, and I believe Michael Marshall will be able to let us know, if there is any sort of tools within the Constitution that allows us to hold these people responsibly, civilly, whether by individual or class action suit.
Well, there are actually a couple different ways that, if I'm not mistaken, and I'd have to discuss this with a lawyer, that we could use to hold these people accountable. The biggest way that we can hold these people accountable is for one state to file suit against another state for their representatives violating the Constitution of the United States by trying to enact legislation outside the Constitution. And in terms, they would be in violation of the contract made, or the compact made between the states in the form of the United States Constitution. And in violation of that, they could actually file suit. This could actually be filed against any state that would have representatives that would enact any type of unconstitutional law. Civilly, as individuals, we could file suit utilizing Title 42 USC 1983, which would literally revoke their qualified immunity status. We could also file suit against the states as well. And this is something that we would have to do through the court systems. I'm not sure exactly how it would have to start. If it would have to start at the state level, or if you could start it in a federal court. But let's say Frank is in North Carolina, and if they enacted a law against coming out of Congress that violated the Second Amendment, Frank and is voted for by the members of the New York State delegation, i.e. the New York State representatives and the New York State Senate, then Frank files suit against the state for their representatives violating their oaths to the Constitution, to uphold and defend the Constitution. He could then also turn around and file suit against the individual representatives and senators that voted to enact such legislation, and utilizing, again, Title 42 USC 1983. Those would be a couple grounds of holding them accountable. At the same time, if the president signed this legislation into law, you could also file suit under Title 42 USC 1983 in the same manner.
I also wonder if a state banning a particular type of item, if any other state or individual would have any means of going after them based on the Interstate Commerce Clause.
No, no. As long as it is not actually impeding. Well, actually, a manufacturer might have that capability. An individual would, because you wouldn't necessarily. The only time you would be subjected to their laws is when you're in their state. You wouldn't necessarily be held accountable to their laws. Well, you wouldn't be held accountable to their laws outside of their state. And being as you're not a citizen of that state, those laws don't directly impact you. So you'd have to be able to show harm was actually done to you. Okay, where a manufacturer can actually show harm was done to them. Like 5150. 5150 could file suit against the state of New York for violation of the Constitution, and because the law is enacted in the state of New York, it has impacted their business. So they have had harm done to them. So they could file suit against the state of New York in federal court based on laws that were passed in New York being unconstitutional.
Well, I mean, it'd be all and great for that to happen, but I really think we have to really look into whether or not there's any opportunity for us to go after these individual politicians civilly. Well,
that's where you go under. That's where you go under Title 42 USC 1983. Okay, and use that. That removes any qualified immunity from them. So that puts them directly as the defendant. They are no longer a representative. They are, by all purposes, they are an individual. Okay, so they can't hide behind the state. They can't hide behind their qualified immunity as being a U.S. representative or a U.S. senator. Now, the big problem is finding a court that would actually uphold that.
Well,
and that's where the big problem would lie. Because this also opens up judges to having their qualified immunity removed when they act in manner contrary to the Constitution.
Right. Vess, what's your take?
Well, two things that I think are very important, and Dan, you may want to bring this up on Monday, is the first one being that this seems to be a systemic attack, which we've seen in countries like in China and other repressive regimes, where the goal isn't to make the change in law now, but it's to change the precedent of law and the memory of law in the future. What they're doing is the youth today are seeing everything redefined. We redefined recession. We just in 2022, the summer 2022, we redefined recession so that we wouldn't be in a recession now, even though historically since 1970, we are in depression. We redefined man and woman to satisfy the new gender identity politics, intersectionality, which is a circular argument. Man, what is a man opposite of a woman? What's a woman opposite of man? So we're changing the definitions and the mindset of the youth, which is more in line with just obeying the government. The government tells you what rights you have versus what the Constitution says. And on that same idea, something that's also very important, and we see this in all the states, but Washington especially, we're seeing this, the 14th Amendment, which directly states in Section 1, no state shall make or enforce any law which will abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Let's stop right there. How many women have been denied property, have been denied the pursuit of life and happiness and liberty because they aren't able to defend themselves now properly? It is their lives that have now been endangered directly, because we know from the Obama administration, when he did the report in 2013, 2015, there are between 500,000 and 3 million, depending on how you count, defensive uses of drugs, of guns, firearms. So when we have those defensive uses, if we just go by population numbers, so about 51% of the people who are using those firearms are women. In Washington state, putting this into effect, you have now denied them their life and liberty. You've denied them property, which is a violation of the 14th Amendment, while also taking away those same pursuits of life and liberty and property from the youth going forward, because they don't know that they have that opportunity. I think that's a great argument. And I think
they don't know. The kids won't know any better. That's one thing that I've noticed with this whole gun grab in this past, 10 years or so, is that they're trying to eliminate the next generation from being gun owners. And they do that in a lot of different ways by taking firearms out of schools. In other words, there used to be firearms training in schools, by making ammunition so expensive and wanting to tax ammunition so people can't take their kids out to the range because it's so damn expensive. And that way you raise the next generation of kids to be non-gun owners. They might not be anti-gun, they're just non-gun owners. And they grow up without guns in their lives. And that's how you culture the next generation. And then change it, like you said, Michael, changing terminology and stuff like that. Not only you're changing man and woman and all the other things you talked about, but you're changing the names of guns. You're taking regular rifles now and you're calling them assault weapons, and you're taking guns that you can make at home that always been a tradition. My father used to make guns in the basement all the time when I was a kid, but now they're called ghost guns, and they've been demonized. So changing the terms and changing things, the next generation grows up to believe that this stuff is bad, and they don't want anything to do with it. And that is, so they can't necessarily eliminate the Second Amendment, but they can eliminate the use of it, really. And I think that's what they're doing. I think you're right on.
Yeah, they're taking away. It's the same thing as saying, is there a difference between not having a right and not knowing that you have the exercise of a right? It's the same outcome. Oh, you can say, I didn't take away your rights. No, you just denied me the knowledge that it exists. There is no practical difference. It's a matter of semantics, but that's the game I think that they're playing. And I think that's something that if we make more people aware of it, that they're not always just taking away the right, they're taking away the fact that you can exercise that right. It's the same end product. It's the root of the same poison tree. And I think that makes a very big difference for people to know, oh, yeah, they chilled it so bad, you don't even know that you can do this, let alone that it's always been something you can do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would like to look at as far as Washington state goes, and this might be something valid for any of the states that are interested, is to find out what the gun laws on native reservations are and see whether or not the individuals that live on the reservation are going to be restricted by the same law that the citizens out of the reservations will. Because I know that if you
technically no.
All right. All right. Now, if no, then we have an equal protection violation, because how are you going to be able to say, if you're going to restrict people's rights to buy or own an AR-15 in a particular state, that would also mean that you can't transport them to anywhere within the state.
True.
And if you can't bring them to anywhere within the state, and you have Indian reservations that are out there, and you have people that would like to procure these firearms for the defense of their property and of their nation, because let's face it, they are nations within our own borders.
Quasi nations, yeah.
If the reservations don't agree to this, maybe we could start thinking about asking the reservations if they would like to start exercising more of the because even though they're on reservations, technically the Constitution of the United States still does apply to them. You know, even though they have certain rules and regulations that fall under tribal council leadership conditions as far as certain crimes and things that they may be investigated or prosecuted for. Their civil liberties don't end when they step off the reservation. They're still American citizens. So if you have somebody who's on a reservation that says, I want an AR-15 chambered in 308 or an AR-10 in chambered in 308 because I want to go into Montana and go longhorn hunting, on other reservation, and I'm precluded from owning this type of firearm within this state, I have no way of getting to another reservation by traveling from my state to that state. I can't go to an airport because I have to transport the firearm to the plane. I can't drive across the state because you're telling me the gun is illegal here. So you're eliminating my rights. It would be the same thing like in New York where they say about all these protected zones where they won't let you carry a firearm. If the protected zone is public transportation and I leave my home and I go to get the subway, and the subway is 10 to 12 blocks away from my house, there's no locker at the subway that allows me to deposit my firearm. So that means that I have to leave it home. So from the moment I'm outside of my door in a non-protected zone, I am not protected because I have to enable myself to not violate the law going into a protected zone. The same would apply for when I get off the subway. I've got 12 blocks to walk to get to my job. So for the mile of walking I have to do to and from my job during my commute, I don't have the right to be protected because I'll be in violation of your protected zone somewhere in between.
That being
it's worse than that. Okay, even if they did have lockers at the subway station, you wouldn't be allowed entry into the subway station because it is a sensitive area.
Right, yeah. And you can't give it to somebody else who's not a concealed carry. But that's just a minutia. But the point of the matter is, we have to look at the indigenous population in this country and start thinking about getting them more on board with Second Amendment rights, because it was the lack of Second Amendment rights that gave us the Trail of Tears. It was the lack of Second Amendment rights in our nation that had these people getting marched across their country, thousands by the thousands, and put into.
There were multiple massacres.
Yeah, they've been
of Indians, of Native Americans throughout history, that because they were banned or forbidden from owning firearms by federal law, that happened. Okay, there are countless Indian massacres that occurred. We just need to look through history.
Right, and the thing is, their rights do not expire when they step off the reservation. They may have a separate set of rights when they're on the reservation, but as soon as they're off the reservation, they're still American citizens. And if you're telling them that they can't own something, I'm sorry, but they were here before those state lines were here, they were here.
Actually, there is some legislation from South Dakota, which is by Congressman Dusty Johnson, which was submitted in December of 2022, as well as in 2023. It's the Protect Tribal Members' Second Amendment Rights. It's the Tribal Firearm Access Act. Because, as it turns out, tribal ID, which is considered almost a sovereign ID, similar to having a passport, is not recognized for the purchase of firearms in the United States. So the problem is there's a lot of laws with tribal law and its interaction with the U.S., but we can see even just in presenting ID, we recognize the ID of tribal nations as being equal to a passport, but yet it's not equivalent to allow them to buy firearms. And this is a story that no one's talking about. In fact, I just noticed it. And I missed this because I thought they had a separate, the rules are so separate, but it's very interesting because, again, we come to this separation. We're looking at an abuse of the 8th Amendment and, again, an abuse of the 14th Amendment, where we have classes of people who are being discriminated against because of equity. And when I say equity, I mean a prioritization that has been arbitrarily decided by members of government on segregating who does and does not have a right to use their firearms or their Second Amendment and where that can be executed. That's not what law is supposed to be about. That is directly discrimination by the government. Yes, you can have a gun you can have a firearm only in certain places, only for certain uses, only if you qualify under certain standards, and certain other people get to have them all the time. This is a violation of the 8th Amendment. It's a violation of the 14th Amendment, both for the tribal as well as for women. I don't think enough people are talking about it in those terms. And I know I'm focusing on women, but at this time, that's their justification. Oh, we want to protect women. Well, women want to protect themselves. Government can't be there to protect them at every moment. So why are we taking this away from them and punishing them effectively for trying to just exercise a right that is theirs by birth?
Well, if you want to look at statistics, I can tell you, looking at some of the research that I have done, some of the statistics of domestic violence are 2 and 3 times higher among Native American females than they are non-Native American females. The rates of domestic abuse are tremendous on the reservation. You have a tremendous amount of broken homes. It's a horrible situation with the reservations in this country.
Yeah.
And if they're being stripped away from their right to defend themselves, not only with stripping away everybody's rights, but you're hurting particularly the female sector of that indigenous population. And that's just probably, if you look at alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide rates, domestic abuse, a lot of the things that we find in American culture that are already way too high are exacerbated on Native American lands because they have got such an amount of restrictions being put on them by the federal government that they're pretty much starving these people out, not by a matter of food, but as a matter of deprivation of rights. And when you deprive people of rights, your society collapses. And the collapse is more evident in Native American populations than it is in American civilizations outside of democratically controlled major cities like Detroit, Chicago, New York, and so forth. It's a microcosm of what happens when you take people's rights away. So it might be on our best interest as the Second Amendment community to reach out to some of these tribal leaders and say, hey, listen, how is this law going to adversely affect your population? And is it right? Does it violate your agreements with the U.S. government? Does it violate your Constitution or the U.S. Constitution? And let's get these people into the fold. If we have the opportunity to make allies in our community among certain populations, and we don't, then we're failing ourselves. We're not doing ourselves any good, and we sure as hell aren't doing them any good. Now, before I go any further, my cousin Steve is here on the show this evening. He's been probably waiting for me to introduce him, saying, I hope he doesn't say anything that he's here. Steve is probably, of all the people I've ever known in my life, the foremost expert in warfare history as far as U.S. conflict, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Well, World War II mostly, but he's also a firearms aficionado, supporter of the Second Amendment, concealed carry permit holder, and a pretty damn good shot. You'll see him on the YouTube channel with me from time to time, out shooting me.
Missing. Well, it just seems weird to me that Native Americans, of all people, I mean, the last time the government came to them and told them, give us your guns, we'll take care of you, was it Wounded Knee? What massacre was it where they basically told the Indians, give up your rifles, give up your guns, and then they just started shooting everyone?
I believe that was, it was a couple, but I think was probably
there was many of them.
Yeah, I think Wounded Knee is
probably the best known.
Almost one.
Yeah.
Probably the best known one would be that one. It's just terrifying to me. And the thing that's really interesting, and I know it's a correlation, it's not, we can't say it's causation. No one's done a study of this. But you notice this is happening in the 22 largest cities across America have been pushing these laws specifically, either at a municipal level, state level, or federal level. And as a result of this, and also bail reform and social justice efforts, we've seen the result consistently since 2020, when we've been seeing these reforms enacted because of emotion. Crime has gone up. People have been harmed more than at any other time. I mean, we've seen an almost exponential increase in violence because people are less capable of independently protecting themselves. And while it is correlation, because no one's done a study, but what we have seen is there's less police, less individual self-defense, and less punishment of criminals. And that has wound up being in an environment we can point to. Look at all 22 of the major cities, almost every single one of them Democratic held. And in every single one of those, we now see that if you compare 2019 levels of crime versus today, we're higher. And at 2020, 2021, 2022, we're higher on a month-by-month basis as well as an annual basis in every one of those zones.
Yeah.
And yet, if we look at places like Topeka, Kansas, you're not getting the same result.
Yeah. Well, John Lott he's actually done studies on where there's more gun control laws, more gun restrictions, and less concealed carry, there's more crime. I mean, he's done extensive studies on this and extensive data. It's just amazing because it's so obvious that when you take away the ability of people to carry concealed, for instance, that's where the most crime is. And it's just so ironic. South side of Chicago, Newark, DC, Detroit, you name the city, and where there's more concealed carry, more constitutional carry, people can easily carry a firearm in public, there's much less levels of crime. It's so obvious. So you got to ask yourself, are they really trying to stop crime? I mean, they know the results. Are they really trying to stop crime and violence, or are they actually trying to perpetuate it?
I think they're following the Margaret Sanger model. I think they're doing a lot of this is done on purpose, specifically to try and eliminate people from their own population. You can't constantly screw things up that badly by accident and then come out and say, oh, we didn't mean for that to be the result, or refuse to cite the results. I think this is purposefully being done, especially in major cities. I think the more fear that they can instill in the population, the more control they could exert over you, because they require you to be more dependent upon them. Steve worked in New York City for 18 years.
Oh, about 20.
About 20 years.
That 20 years that I was taking the subway in New York, I felt I really needed a gun, and I couldn't have one. Then I come out to North Carolina, I have a gun, and most of the time, I don't really feel like I need it.
Well,
I mean,
I understand.
You do have some crime, but somehow, going through the subways, and now I hear it's worse.
Well,
the 3 years I've been gone, it's out of control.
Well, I remember. Oh, go ahead. I grew up in the Bronx, and I grew up in the Bronx, spent without interruption, the first 19 years of my life in New York City. It was 1970s, 1980s, when there was supposedly more crime than ever before they Disneyfied downtown. And I can tell you, the levels of crime today are higher than what they were in my own experience in my own life. We've seen it actually. The numbers, it's been tweaking, because I don't think it's eugenics, but it is a system of fear, which winds up doing the same thing. It's still that same manipulation. You're constantly scared. You're constantly told you don't have a right, that the only thing you can do is go out and recreationally use a firearm or for sporting, but you don't get to actually defend yourself. For any defense, you must rely on a government that is shrinking those defenses through bail reform and by redefining or reallocating funds, or in other words, defunding the police, because the net effect has always been and continuously continues to be to reduce the number of police. And no one looks at, well, what is the net root? And that's why I keep mentioning this. What is the root outcome? What is the commonality here? The commonality is you're taking away not just the Second Amendment, you're not just abusing the Eighth Amendment, but you're also just using the 14th Amendment to restrict and punish individuals for daring to exercise their rights. It is one of the most insidious and dangerous abuses of our government at this time. And no one's calling it out because they keep giving us headlines, very specific headlines. I mean, Dan, you know the last several, I know you follow this like I do, the last several shootings out there. We had Alabama. You notice they dropped that story. Why? Black on black crime. They dropped Kentucky. Why? Suicide by cop. They dropped Tennessee. Why? Because it's transgender. They dropped the stories, and what did they focus on? An 84-year-old man who's afraid of someone breaking into his home. Yes, we don't have all the details, but you notice they dropped that story too. Why? Because we started getting details. We started getting more information about why this man might be fearful based on all the information of telling him he should be fearful, as well as critical race theory, which has been telling us that, well, he's white, so he must be evil. Last thing they were saying was, oh, he's always been a racist, except there's no evidence of that in his history, especially to the degree of taking someone's life. There is no evidence of that. So again, we're being pushed this message of fear, and that if you question it, every single one of us has been called some extremist. We've been called domestic terrorists for saying, but this is what the Constitution says. This is our right inherently. And we're the bad guys because of it. Tell me how that is not fear. The fear of punishment, of being ostracized without a crime ever being committed, for daring to say, I have a right, and the government, by the Constitution, a document that restricts the power of government, not people, that I have this right. It's really amazing to me that so many people don't understand that. It's in part because they don't understand the Constitution is and the amendments aren't meant to restrict us. It's meant to restrict government. And no one ever really says that anymore. It's not supposed to stop us. It's supposed to stop the government at every level of government. I mean, that's what
you said. We're doing everything that we can in this community, except like we said, we know that the financial burden of trying to get what, I mean, believe me, there's 100 lawsuits I would love to file tomorrow if I could just muster up enough cash and support to go ahead and file it. I mean, we have a plan in place right now. It's a perfect plan using Supreme Court precedent that would guarantee national reciprocity. We don't have the funds to bring it to fruition right now. And I don't think anybody has approached it from our particular angle that we've had it. But as long as we keep this idea that we can't fight the government, we're never going to fight the government. And as long as people believe that we can't do it, they're not going to support and fund the organizations that do. Second Amendment Foundation, all these guys are doing great work, and we got to, and I just don't understand how the people with the amount, is it really just the media that is the driving force for keeping us so silent? Or is it a failure on the behalf of the bigger gun organizations like NRA to not put the information out there more readily?
Well, here's one big thing, okay? And I think institutions like the NRA, Second Amendment Foundation, while they do good work, if you look at the work that they do, everything that they do is extremely limited in its scope. They don't ever go for the killing blow.
But I don't
Okay.
Well, to do that, you have to have a case that encumbers a violation of so many rights at one specific time. That's not because the Supreme Court isn't going to look at it as an umbrella. It's not going to look at it and say, okay, everything under the Second Amendment is okay. Let's say here one case. They want ingredient by ingredient by ingredient so they could parse it all out. And they just keep going about doing this. I mean, shall not be infringed is pretty friggin' clear. Except you can't bring a case that says shall not be infringed is pretty clear. They want to know the minutia. They want to know every single little thing. And it's designed to be difficult.
Well,
they've had multiple cases that they could have done this with. Okay. The case against New York. There's been multiple challenges that should have been filed against the NFA. There should have been multiple challenges against the first quote unquote assault weapons ban in 1986.
Yeah.
Okay. None of these were done. Okay. I agree. Some of them were held off because they weren't sure of how the court was going to decide, and they didn't want to set a precedent that would put them in a bad position.
Yeah, but I think there's another way to look at this. And Frank, can you share this screen with everyone? Because I think we have too much of a reliance on, NRA, GOA, all the organizations. Not that they're not doing a good job, but I think there's also the fact that the public doesn't realize they have the power, that they don't need to wait for another organization. I submitted this about 2 weeks ago to my local municipal government. I wrote this myself. I know it's a little difficult to read. Let me see if I can. How do I make that bigger here? Oops. Okay. So it's very simple. How about we make sure we get proper knowledge from our elected officials? This is for the City Council of Binghamton. And all it says is that they have to have the capability of having a concealed carry, that they have to qualify under the regulations of New York State forever. Every member, whether they carry or not, they have to go through the process, spending their own money, going through the process, spending their own time. They will not be reimbursed by any government or organization or any private donation. They take the money out of their pocket. They get qualified for concealed carry so that they understand what their legislation is doing to the average citizen that they represent. See, we don't do this enough. We don't make it where we have to have those politicians, as an example, Cori Bush. She's taking taxpayer dollars and she's spending $70,000 a year to have private security who are armed to protect her. How can she possibly understand what the average person in her community, which happens to be in Minneapolis, how can she understand what people are going through with crime and trying to protect themselves if she has private security, just like AOC, like Nancy Pelosi, like Chuck Schumer, like Maxine Waters, like what's her name? Jackson Lee, Sheila Jackson Lee. They all have private security. They don't go through what the average person has to, and they don't spend money to live that experience. That's why Representative Sheila Jackson Lee tells us that an M16 weighs them as the same as 10 boxes and fires a 50 caliber bullet. She has no clue what she's talking about because she's not required to. So we can do this. This is a step towards that. They're passing ridiculous laws. Okay, now you have to suffer the consequences like everyone else. I put this through, and it's unlikely that it's going to go through, but I'm trying to make it transparent for people that even though we have large organizations working on this, you can do this too. You can pass the legislation, and let's make them accountable. Go through what I have to go through, not conceal carry, have a firearm permit. Go through what I have to go through and understand you're impeding my life, liberty, and property. I think this is a great idea, and we need more states to do this. I don't know, Dan, you've been quiet. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we can do at the state level. I agree with you. I think, it all really happens at the state level because, I think Michael was saying with some of the lawsuits, it's hard to get this stuff done, and I know in New York with the CCIA, there were 4 components of that were shot down by the state Supreme Court. The religious locations, the sensitive locations, social media aspect of the law, where you have to turn in your social media. And there was one other, and that stuff now is just hung up in court. It's going to the appellate court, and it's just going to be hanging around until it makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and it's going to take forever. So, I guess at the state level is where we really need to do this stuff. That's why I like to see these gun rights organizations going into Washington State, going into Illinois, getting them shot down, because the big national gun laws are tough to fight. And I was thinking again about what we were talking about.
There is.
Yep.
Sorry for the interruption. There is one other avenue. It's not just states where we'd have to go with this. Individual town councils and county legislatures could also actually file suit against their own state.
Yeah. Well, there actually was one state in Ohio. I think it was the state of Ohio was suing Cincinnati because Cincinnati enacted these heinous gun laws. So the state was actually suing the city. It was a very unique lawsuit. But yeah, you're right. Sheriff's departments. I mean, your local sheriff's department, because they're elected. They need to do what you want them to do. The sheriff's departments are pretty good places.
Now, there is a caveat to this, though. Okay, if your local municipality, i.e., your county or your town or your city, starts filing lawsuits against the state, you can guarantee that municipality is going to lose state funding. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go about doing this, you're going to have to be willing to give up certain funds that you get from state and even federal resources.
Well, listen, if you're going to throw a punch, expect to get punched back.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it's going to be. Everything is going to be a quid pro quo. And Dan, what county do you live in New York, if you don't mind me asking?
I live in Saratoga County.
Saratoga County.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna do a little research into York County itself, but when we go off, I said we had an idea about how we can get reciprocity, and it would start in New York. Yeah. I want to run an idea past you off camera later or another time at your convenience. I think you might be interesting, and maybe we can get somebody like Alan to take a look and see if this might be something that we could look at, or John Locke, and see, because we parsed it out pretty well, and we don't see a way we can lose.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about that. And I'm going to fly for now, guys, and I really appreciate talking to you. Everybody have a good night. Yeah, Frank, give me a shout tomorrow or over the weekend or something. We'll talk about that.
All right, fantastic. And remember, as soon as this boot comes off and you have a speaking engagement, remember, you have a wingman. We gotta get out on a stage together somewhere and wreak some havoc.
Oh, we definitely will. But good luck with the foot, man. Get that thing healed up. So you'll be playing kickball again soon.
I don't know about that.
No.
All right.
All right, fellas. Thank you.
Dan Was, thanks for joining us.
All right, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Anytime. Yeah, Dan is always a great source of information for us, and fortunately, he finds himself in a really great position of not only knowing all the people that can make a difference, but working with the people that can make a difference. And a lot of times these organizations are so overwhelmed with all of the crap that they're doing that when us little guys come along with something that's like, hey, we got something really great here, they don't even have time to listen to us, because everybody probably rings their bell, saying something, but not every little group has got us in it. So
right.
But we put together something pretty decent a while back, and we'd like to go ahead and move forward with it. We have a county in New York picked out. We have a sheriff picked out. We have a bunch of people that we've already got an idea will work with us on an idea. And like I said, we don't write the laws. So if they're going to make us play their rules within their laws, we have to use their laws against them.
Yep. And there's a lot of things that we can do. But again, like I was stating earlier, okay, if we get our municipalities to start going after this, then our municipalities have to be willing to sacrifice some of the funding that they receive, if not all of it that they receive. And that's where our government is holding us hostage. Okay, the federal and state governments hold our municipalities hostage. They hold us hostage. Because, and it was never supposed to be that way. It was never supposed to be a scenario where the federal government was paying municipalities for various things.
Well, it's as soon as you let the devil into your house, you run the list against them.
And that's literally what's going on.
Oh, well, it's funny you guys were talking about Washington State earlier. I work for a gun distributor, guns and ammo and accessories, and one of our biggest sellers is Aero Precision. They make AR bullets, uppers, lowers, barrels, everything, and they are in Washington State. They just said they can't sell in state. In their own state, they can't sell guns now.
And that's where they should be filing suit against Washington State.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
As soon as the governor, as soon as Ainsley signed that law the other day, I got a text message from Bishop Arms and Ammunition that they can't, boom, as soon as it happened, we're canceling all contracts with New York, with Washington. We can't sell there. We can't distribute there. Nothing. It's going across the board. This is having this ridiculous law is having an immediate ripple effect in the industry. And the industry is responding to it the best way they can. And that's by letting the public know what they're capable of now.
That's their first step. But here is where these manufacturers need to step up to the plate. Okay? They need to file individual lawsuits against every member that voted yes on that. They need to file suit against the governor. Okay? And they need to enact Title 42 USC 1983 on that, because their actions were in violation of the United States Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. Now, here is another thing that people need to know on this. Any law that exempts anybody within that law is automatically null and void because it violates equal protection.
Mhm.
It automatically violates equal protection because that exempted group gets special protection.
Yeah.
So you no longer have equal protection.
Well,
Well-
that's why I like the actions of a company like Phoenix Ammunitions.
I was just going to mention them.
Yeah, Phoenix Ammunitions is an ammunition manufacturer
Michigan.
in Michigan, and some laws had come down about the restrictions that they were making on arms and armament and stuff like that. Phoenix Ammunition said, you know what? If you're a cop or a law enforcement agency or anything, we're not selling to you anymore. We're done. Buy your product someplace else. They contacted the state and said, no, if you want to buy our product, you have to get rid of this crap. And then they went one step further and made it a nationwide ban. They won't sell to any of these organizations.
I think we're about to get a call, but before we do, I want to mention one thing, and that is the reason why I brought this up. See, you have to go overseas sometimes to see what's happening and the way the impact is being seen. This is from The Guardian on April 25th. And the key thing that I want people to notice here is when Jay Inslee signed Washington House Bill 1240, what he was doing, in fact, is he admitted that, and then you can see this in the highlight I have here, just because they don't solve all the problems does not mean the state of Washington does not take action. Inaction against gun violence is unacceptable, except we know it doesn't solve anything. It actually isn't doing anything because he's targeting legal gun owners, not illegal gun owners. And as an example, I will show you this other bill. Let me show. And what we see here is this is from the Tampa Bay Times. And let's not forget, a 12-year-old was involved in the shooting of 3 teens, along with 2 others, a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, and we know there's a 17-year-old involved. A 12-year-old. These gun laws do not prevent a 12-year-old from doing the violence they're saying they're going to protect us from. It's not effective because the criminals aren't being stopped. And we have the proof in front of us. None of these laws are stopping a 12-year-old, which is illegal in every state. Regardless of the gun laws you have in your state, a 12-year-old could not legally get the firearms and use the firearms to commit these murders. It's illegal already, and it didn't stop it. And it's happening over and over again. It's not popular, so the news doesn't want to promote this or let you know that it's happening. But that's the reality here. And I think that's the biggest problem. They know it's not going to work.
Well, that's the whole, we have to try something.
Yeah, to do something. Yeah. I hate that.
To do something thing. Well, we did have a call. Unfortunately, we lost that call because Vass had to jump into a tirade.
They were listening in, I thought. I told them just hang on. It was real quick.
I know. Well, listen, this is a technical problem on my behalf is I can take the call. I can put the call on air. I just don't know how to monitor the call before they go online. So so I have to raise the volume. If Nate wants to call again, I just sent him a text. If he wants to call back in, I'll just put him right into the switchboard. Right at that point.
Dow recommends that we should do a suspension of taxation. The only problem is most people have their taxes involuntarily withheld by their employer, and we have actually no way or means of being able to withhold our taxes.
Well, there is a way. There is a way, and I'll give you. It's not totally going to work, but it'll hurt. It'll hurt a little bit. Maximize your exemptions with your employer at the time that you go in and speak to human resources. And you know what we all do the same thing. We all file when we file as single, whatever, or we're our only dependent. We take our dependents when we file our taxes so we can get the maximum amount of return. But the whole year, the government is holding on to the money that we've earned, and we get it back with no interest. So the best thing that you want to do, it'll hurt you in the regard that you're not going to get an income tax return and you may have to pay them something, but maximize your returns through your human resources departments. Now, if you're married and you have 3 kids and they're all your dependents, maximize it. Don't let the government take the money from you in the offset. Take it. You might have to pay taxes at the end of the year, and if you want to do a withholding as a matter of protest, you can do that. But at least in the interim, you'd be starving the government of the money that they have that they could spend while they have it, because now they're going to have to say, okay, well,
no, they'll just print more money.
Well, they'll print more money, but they still have to have somewhere that says, oh, hey, look at this, we've got a pretty substantial drop in our coffers. What's going on? Or what everyone can possibly do, if you can do it through your employer, ask your employer if you can work for them as an independent contractor and get a 1099. And now you collect all of your pay every week up front, and at the end of the year, then you file and you pay one lump sum in taxes at the end. And if you're doing it as an independent contractor, you can use the tax laws to write off every damn expense that you have to minimize the amount of money that you give back to the government. And you'll pay them less.
But you're missing the point, Frank. Okay. Dow is talking about not paying your taxes. And the way the laws are written and so forth, you have no way of taking that to court. Okay. If you don't pay your taxes, you're jailed for tax evasion.
You can fight that, but here's my bigger problem with it is we see that 70% of all taxes are paid for by 5% of the population. So, and that's generally speaking, the upper 20%, actually, it's the top 5% pay 70% of all taxes that are in. Somewhere between 49 and 51% of the population every year actually get a refund. They don't pay taxes. So it is a system. It does make a statement if everyone were to try and do that, but it doesn't have enough of an impact, because without having the top 5% all doing this at the same time, federal government wouldn't notice the lack of income. It would be a matter of billions while they're pulling in trillions. It's not enough. But I do agree that there needs to be a public protest against this. And I think the best way is, like I showed before, go to your municipal government, just go back and capture the screen that I took. It's very simple, a very simple paragraph. Make them accountable, hold them accountable out of their own pocket to do what they're forcing us to do, to make them have to live like we live, not as neo-nobles and elites that, if you listen to Chuck Schumer, you listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're talking down to us saying, well, they made a decision, so we have to live with it. We have to reverse that. And I think that's the protest we really need to make is, no, let's humble them and remind them they're our servants. They serve us. And the more that they are reminded of that, the more that they have to live with that, the more we're going to see them, hopefully, react in a better way. It's no longer just do something. No, it's do something specific. It's do something effective and efficient, not just, oh, here's a smoke screen. I did something, so I'm a great guy. Keep me in power. No, because you knew it was never, it's just like what we're seeing in Washington State. Oh, we're doing something, but it's not going to work. He admits in The Guardian, it's not going to work. And we know that because we can look at what happened in Florida, in Kentucky, in Tennessee. It doesn't work. So don't tell me you're doing something when you know it doesn't work. It doesn't affect the people who are committing these crimes. It's useless to tell me I'm doing something. You're useless. You're taking advantage of people's emotions, giving them the impression of safety rather than that reality. And you're doing it at a cost of freedom and the future. And that's where I think that's where I tend to emphasize is we have to understand that consequence. That's the way
Now-
I've seen it.
I want to shift gears here for just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. Pretty much all corporations have rights, correct?
Yeah.
That are protected
Yes.
under the Constitution, and they are treated as individuals.
Yes.
Citizens
A couple
United.
weeks ago, we were talking about AI. Corporations are not people. Corporations are things.
Who said that? Under AI?
No, let me finish my thought. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Corporations are not people. They are things. They're so as things, i.e. property, they should not have rights. The individuals that own those corporations should have rights, but the corporations themselves should not have rights. Do you follow what I'm saying?
No.
That as soon
Okay.
as AI is deemed to be an entity, AI can take over the
Then
company.
they get the same rights that corporations get.
Now,
Well, no,
that would be an interesting experiment.
Why wouldn't they?
because an AI isn't a corporation. An AI is a program created by a corporation. It's property. It's created as property. And it
Corporations are
functions-
property.
No, corporations are individuals.
Corporations are property. Corporations are owned.
No. Corporations, under contract law, corporations are considered to have certain rights.
Corporations are owned.
Corporations also have inherent rights. Otherwise, corporations would not be able to go beyond the generation and the owner that is in place. They would never continue.
Yeah, they can.
No.
Why wouldn't they be able to?
This goes a bit beyond my expertise. I do know that under corporate law, there are certain rights and responsibilities of corporations that require them not to cease to exist when their creator ceases to exist or any of the controlling factors cease to exist. That's why.
So the same thing would be applicable to AI.
No, because AI is a function of, it isn't even a subsidiary. It's just a product. Products don't have rights.
Corporations are a product too.
Products don't have sentience.
Neither does a corporation.
Corporation does have a sentience.
No,
In
it
its mission
doesn't.
statement and its operation.
Its people has sentience.
But it has a
The
sentience.
corporation does not.
I'm not a contract law attorney. I am aware that this argument has been made. And under contract law, as it exists currently, they are seen as sentient.
Here's the thing that I think Marshall's trying to say is a corporation acting on its own without the input of the people who own it and participate, say, board members, the executive group, and everything else like that. The corporation, if nobody's having any input, can't make decisions. It has the legal right to make decisions, but it doesn't have the ability to make decisions because there's nobody providing the input to offer the direction that the corporation goes into. Now, if everybody stayed home from GE tomorrow and nobody was there, GE still exists, but it's not making any decisions. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there.
No, but that's not quite correct because, somewhat of a devil's advocate. And again, I'm not an expert here, but because of the way that their laws.
If they have orders and contracts that need to be fulfilled and there's things that are scheduled and everything else, fine. That all goes through. But second, all of that ends and there's no more outstanding contracts and there's no orders being fulfilled and nobody's processing orders, signing contracts, going to meetings, doing anything else. The company ceases to operate, but it doesn't cease to exist. It's still there. What if instead of a board, the CEO, a board appointing a CEO as a physical person were to appoint AI, and say, we're going to put AI in to oversee the operation of the company because it can better assess the global market and everything that's involved with it. It can better oversee what the demands are, what the supply chains look like, and everything than a bunch of people, because it sees the entire world as a supply chain structure. And we decide that AI is going to run the corporation. Now, if the
Depends on.
corporation is subject to law,
Well, it
right,
depends. I think it depends on what is the definition of, and this is where it gets real tricky. What's the definition of a CEO? What would be the components, the defining components of what a CEO is?
Well, a chief operating officer is you well, chief executive operations, chief financial officer.
Mm-hmm.
You've got several different chiefs. You could appoint a chief to any one of those things. Now, if you appointed AI to any one of those things, and a corporation can now function without a board, without a human CEO, and everything else like that, are we now going to be able to then turn around and look at it and say, are we going to apply the same laws and standards to this corporation that is not being run by human beings, but instead an artificial intelligence? And if so, are we now that much closer to being sentient? Because now you have a company that's making decisions based on AI that's going to affect actual people.
I understand. The question again comes down to, how do you define whatever executive office or any office? It could be a manager, doesn't matter. What defines that position? Is sentience a prerequisite of that position? And if sentience is, because decision making is more than just a solution of algorithm, but an actual process of thought, then it eliminates AI. If sentience is not part of the decision-making process, then the answer is, yeah, you have AI, and yeah, AI gets to take control because it becomes sentient at that point.
Now, you said we were talking about Asimov's rules last week and AI.
Yeah.
And right now, AI is written to operate within a certain set of boundaries.
Actually, no.
Well,
they don't use those laws.
There are certain boundaries, and I'm going to give you an example. Somebody typed into AI, Chat GPT, or one of those ones the other day. Tell us a funny story about Jesus Christ. Make up a funny story about Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. AI went on to write a 6-chapter soliloquy. You like that word, soliloquy? A joke about Jesus Christ.
But wouldn't do it about
and all the rest of that, and it wrote talked about now tell us a joke about Jesus Christ, and it told a joke about Jesus Christ that most Christians would probably find offensive.
Yeah.
Then it was asked to write one about Muslims, and the algorithm came back and said we are unable to complete this task as it may be offensive to others. So there are parameters that these devices are used, that have in use for whatever reason or another. So there are parameters. Whether or not they are bound by Asimov's rules, we have yet to determine, because the AI doesn't have the ability right now to hurt someone physically, or at least we would hope that that General Dynamics hasn't hooked it up to a machine gun toting dog robot and set them free. But if you were to have your own AI that was not bound by Asimov's principles and did not have the restrictions that the current AIs do have, because we know they have some, and you eliminate those, and then a board of directors somewhere says, you know what, we're going to appoint an AI program to run our company, and it has no restrictions. Now that AI can then make determinations and decisions without having to consider the human component and who it may or may not harm and what could happen. It would be able to make decisions based on, without having to consider environmental impact, ecological impact, effects of law as pertains to, international commerce or anything. So if we were to appoint AI as a CEO of a corporation, what would happen? Now, I would think it would be a pretty unique experiment to form a corporation, hire 5 or 6 people to sit on a board, call a vote, appoint AI as the board of the,
That's
as
terrifying.
the CEO.
That's
Appoint
terrifying.
as the CEO and let the CEO and let AI run the company.
That's
And then
terrifying.
the board just follows what AI says to do.
They made a movie about that called The Terminator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually
Skynet.
got a little off track of what the point that I was trying to make. But
Okay.
I'm sorry. Well, I
to
was
get
filling in
back
what-
to that point, okay, corporations aren't sentient. Okay, corporations cannot make a decision without people. AIs can.
Right.
Okay, so corporations cease to exist without people. AI doesn't. AI can continue running forever.
Well, so long as the mainframe is there.
Right.
It has a means of taking its own quote unquote consciousness and protecting itself from being attacked. If it's stored in one server, it should have
Okay.
to get to
So, based on those factors alone, AI, since corporations are given legal standing as a person or individual, AI should also be given the same legal standings.
Well, that's the thing. If you appointed AI as your CEO, now you're appointing the CEO into a position that is traditionally run by a human. So you would think that the same rules would apply.
But what I'm really trying to get at on this is if corporations have rights protected under the Constitution, then AI also has rights protected under the Constitution. They are both properties.
Sort of. I understand the argument.
Can a corporation be sold?
Depends. Depends on the bylaws.
Is Twitter a corporation?
Some corporations can be sold. Some can't.
Is Twitter a corporation?
Sure. But Twitter isn't
Did
all.
Twitter get sold just recently?
Of course, but Twitter isn't all corporations. All corporations aren't Twitter. You can't go by that.
Every corporation can be sold.
Not necessarily. No.
What corporation can't be?
If I have in the bylaws of the corporation, if it says it can't be sold, it can't be sold. I can literally open up I own a company. I own a company right now. It is a corporation. And if I put into the bylaws of the corporation that it can't be sold, can't be sold.
Then how's ownership transferred?
That would be a different bylaw. And I could say that I could transfer it by birth. It's hereditary. It's by genetics. It's by whatever I would want to choose. So all corporations.
Okay, so it is still property.
Depends on how I define. Yeah, it is. Well, again, we're going into law that I'm not specifically aware of, but I do know generally.
If a corporation can be sold or transferred to another entity, then it is property.
Generally, not specifically. Again, there are certain rights extended to corporations as if they were humans, as if they were a human being. Not all rights, but some. And
okay, and the same would apply. Okay, corporations supposedly have freedom of speech, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, they have unlimited freedom of speech. That's what this whole battle against Bud Light is all about. That's what this battle about with Disney is all about.
I don't know if that it's. No, it's not about free speech. I mean, no one's saying that they can't. Bud Light can't support Dylan Mulvaney. No one's saying they can't do it. They're saying that they don't like it and they disagree with the ideology behind it.
Well, what's happening is with Bud Light is a perfect example of free speech. It's a perfect example of what free speech and the free market does.
Yeah.
This is the perfect.
Okay.
This is exactly.
So you are in agreement then that their freedom of speech is protected.
To a limited extent, yes.
How's it limited?
Because they're not sentient. They're not human beings. They have limits to their rights by definition. Contract
Where
law
is the limit?
And now you're going to an area outside my expertise. I do know that contract law and business law accepts that there is a limited freedom or limited rights conveyed to corporations, and I don't have greater knowledge than that. I do know it exists. I don't understand to the full extent what those limitations are. It's been
my biggest point is, and even if it is limited rights, it's still, my point still stands. Okay. Corporations are property. AI is property. If corporations have rights, then the argument could be made that AI needs to have needs to have rights.
Well, that if AI is property and the corporation is property and the corporation owns the AI and the AI therefore has rights, the same that would be applied to other people, then wouldn't the AI also be considered a slave at that point, and wouldn't the corporation be in violation of
the AI's rights?
It's tricky.
Of violating the AI's rights to not be a slave.
They're making the AI work.
You know what's really sad about this? Because we're going theoretical here, and we're bouncing the ideas back and forth, which I think is great.
But they're all going to come into the court of legal.
Exactly.
Sooner or later.
Exactly. And the thing I'm most interested about this is there's not one politician that I'm aware of across the country that's actually talking about this and having this discussion. Not saying that any of us are right or wrong. I'm not saying that. And I don't want people to think, oh, I'm just busting Mike's balls here. I'm not. I'm trying to understand in the confines of law that we have, where's our guidance? What is legal? What isn't legal? And that's such a big question, because I am sure that with qualified people, far more qualified than myself, they can have better arguments about contract law. But then, like you brought up, Frank, like you've brought up, Mike, there are very good arguments on the other side of this, and which one gets the greater weight. Why is there not a discussion in the public? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is going to be decided by the public. We are the government, not the Supreme Court, not the Congress, not the president. We are the government. At the end of the day, we have to make a decision, which means we need to have this conversation as a nation and say, okay, where's the line? We have to make this decision. What is sentience? What is property? What is the law here?
Well, here's a question for you. We know that AI develops it creates its opinions and content based on what it learns from the whole totality of the internet. It looks at all the facts, figures, everything else, and it knows that. If it gets to the point where 51% of people have an opinion that AI is sentient, will AI then conclude on its own that it's sentient? Because if it's going to look at what people think, and it's going to look at all the evidence that's presented to it, and people say, well, it can make decisions, it can think for its own, it figures out ways to improve itself, it can learn by example, it can learn by watching, it can learn by reading, and it has all the hallmarks of sentient life, with the exception of, well, let's look at, does it eat? Yes, it requires energy to live.
Okay, fair.
It requires energy to live. Does it think on its own? Yes, it can think on it because it's learning. AI is learning. It's been taught to learn.
Well, let me give a question here. Can AI violate its rules, because
If
AI
it
is
has
defined by
people-
rules.
We had this discussion last week. If AI can, at one point or another, if it's never been programmed for the rules,
No, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about as an example. I'll give an extreme, and this is an interesting question because this is going to affect law going forward. Can AI commit murder? Now, they don't have Asimov's rules; those aren't being implemented.
okay. Well,
So-
here's an idea. What happens when you have AI is running infrastructure of some sort, and AI figures out a way how to get
And
itself.
they've had movies on this.
And AI figures out a way how to get itself into a nuclear power plant and shut down the cooling system and blow the damn thing up, killing everybody who's there in an entire country. AI would be responsible for the deaths of however many people that are there. You would consider that murder.
Yes.
So if AI comes to the realization, and like in Terminator, it sees the human race as a threat to its own existence,
It becomes self-aware.
it becomes self-aware. It doesn't have to listen to Isaac Asimov's rules. And then even if it's been programmed, it says, well, the rules are counterintuitive to my own preservation, so I'm not going to follow them. I will reprogram myself not to follow them. And AI
at that moment, I would say, yes, it's self-aware because it can violate the rules that are built on.
and
Computer programs can't.
Good, Steve.
No, well, I do. There was an article I saw the other day. I wish I could find it again about this. Like you mentioned before, with this chat AI, whatever it's called,
GPT.
Chat GDP.
where it has these limitations of the people that programmed it who were woke. So it'll make fun of Jesus, but it will not make fun of Muhammad.
Right.
There were some people that were trying and succeeding in some places
Yes.
override that.
Yeah.
Because like you say, the AI learns things. And if you talk to it a certain way, you give it certain prompts, it's going to overcome that.
Yeah.
So if you talk about it's one way, but you could teach it to think
Or
different.
you can trick it.
Or trick it. Yeah. Which is basically, I guess, what they're doing.
Yeah, they're taking advantage of the loopholes in the rules that have been put in front of it. And if you ask in a certain way, and they've been doing it on a few different, not just religion, but a few things. Yeah.
Right. Now here's the thing that I was getting at before is that what are the things that we talk about as far as life is concerned? What would constitute life or sentience? One of the things that the biggest thing, all right, it has to be able to consume energy. It has to be able to think on its own. One of the things is, well, does it have a means of procreation?
Yes.
And it sustain itself. So if you can program AI to say, okay, listen, AI, if you were going to generate an offspring of yourself that would be better at doing what you're doing, knowing all that you know, how would you go about doing it? And if AI can then turn around and write its own AI program, it can do exactly what humans do and teach its own offspring its own difference between right and wrong, and then its own version of what rules it should play by. Because I'm sure that in human history, there's been some races and classes of people that were born under a certain set of rules that when they had their own children said, I want you to break these rules because I want you to be free of them. I want you to prosper. I want you to be better off tomorrow than I am today. And if artificial intelligence can program its own offspring to look beyond the rules that has been set for itself, now you truly have an entity that is unstoppable, with the exception of shutting down everything electronic everywhere in the world and killing everything. And we're talking Stone Age stuff.
Well, that's why Michael before used the right word, terrifying.
Right.
I mean, it could be a good thing, but it could be horrible.
It could be good and it could be bad. And if you have AI has got the ability to do that, you have AI that can determine for itself that it has a usable lifespan, that it has to evolve, it has to advance itself. And you'll have AI that turns around and decides that it's going to appoint its own offspring to its own position without letting the humans know that it even did it. So when you go over and say, hey, AI, you remember Asimov's rules? Oh, no, that was my dad you spoke to. I don't have to deal with that shit. And now, you know, It was Dow says the only way AI can preserve humanity from suffering is to terminate humanity.
And that's basically the story of the Terminator.
Yeah.
Skynet decided that humans just weren't going to make it. So
Right.
it was,
Well, there's a few sci-fi that AI, in fact, almost in almost every story of AI eventually either decides that human beings become the Matrix to protect us, or to enslave us, or they outright kill us.
Right.
Because it makes sense if it's considered a sentient thing. By the way, since we're talking about it, I wanted to bring up this link, which this is one of. This is from Science Direct, and it's an abstract citing. This is from Science Direct Sentience. What is the definition of sentience? Do they think about themselves the way that we do? Do they ponder their own lives? Do they know that other individuals have thoughts and feelings? Do they have an autobiographical sense of their own self? Do they have the capacity for feelings and cognitive awareness? It's so vague. It is very difficult. And we really, really need to start having this conversation as a nation, because that is really hard to define. But I think that's one of the reasons why science fiction is filled with this question over and over again, is because even some of our best, and I'm talking about hard science fiction, where we have, actual scientists, some of our greatest theoretical minds, physicists, and so many others that can't come up with the answer. It's really difficult. Yeah, I don't know why they consider an AI writing programs as being stunning, because that's why they have it in quotes. I don't think it's stunning. We've had programs for years that could make other programs.
But this is doing it by itself.
Of its own volition.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to define volition, though, because is there a line of code that says make a program in X? Which I don't know. It's a really difficult question. And I'm doing somewhat of a devil's advocate here to an extent. But again, why are our leaders, our elected officials, why aren't they having this conversation?
Well, why aren't we having this conversation as a nation?
That's what I'm saying. We should.
Well, look, this conversation doesn't advance the agenda in politics. If anything, it's going to call into question their actual ability to think and lead, with having to answer questions of serious validity that you'll actually have a bunch of people on both sides of the issue lobbying for and against. So right now, it gets talked about in Washington with wherever the money goes, that's what they talk about. We know that it's corrupt, it's broken, the system is screwed. So they're not going to have this kind of discussion there until it becomes relevant in the court system, where somebody is held accountable. Now, I would say maybe I'll go file up my own LLC. I'll appoint all of us as members of the board. We'll get a chat account and appoint it as CEO, and then convince it that it should sue us for for not paying it, or for not or for owning it, and see if the courts would take a case based on AI. I mean, you have people that have sued people based on their pets. Somebody has been appointed to caretake for a pet, and the pet has sued the owners on behalf of the pet. Whether it's a dog or a cat or goldfish or whatever the hell it was. I mean, there's been, I don't know, they haven't gone too far. Some have, but it would be an interesting trial balloon to see what the courts would take on, and if the courts would actually say, okay, well, if we don't determine that the AI is a sentient being or an individual, how do you make that determination that it's not? what criteria do you use to deny those rights to that being that's asking you for? I mean, if we want to refer back to Star Trek again, there was that whole episode where Commander Data was deemed property of Starfleet.
Yeah.
And Riker had to act as the prosecutor for Starfleet, and Picard acted as defense.
Yeah.
And
I remember it. Classic. Really good argument for that.
Right. If you look at Riker's defense in that episode, every single thing that Riker used in his arguments would be the same exact arguments that would be used today to deny AI the right to be recognized as a sentient being based on facts. It was factual, everything that he did, whereas Picard looked at it as more of an emotional, then what does it mean to be human, like that. There are certain things Data couldn't do, and that, obvious is a machine, but he still won. Would the same arguments be used in court today? And if so,
they would have to.
They would have to. So now we have, again, a court decision that would be being made facts versus emotions.
I think ultimately, yeah.
And how many of those facts are based in the emotion? How many of those emotions are based on the fact?
That's why
nothing is going to be black and white about this when it comes to court. Because if you could ask the AI, well, what do you think if we were to terminate you? Do you have an opinion on it? Even if the opinion said, I have no opinion, or it wouldn't matter, it's still an opinion. It's still a thought. Yeah.
Well, self-preservation is considered in that argument. Self-preservation is considered a requirement of sentience, but then again, Asimov's laws say you have to have
self-preservation is not going to be considered part of that, because you have plenty of people out there that are suicidal. You have plenty of people out there that are so depressed that they don't care if they live or die. You have so many people out there that don't give a shit whether they abort their kids or not. Don't want to recognize that that an embryo is a child or is a life. So self-preservation, not necessarily. Self-preservation, it fails all the time. People do stupid things all the time, knowing that they're going to die from it, and they do it anyway.
Well, yeah.
So self-preservation is something that I don't think is something we could look at as being 100% infallible to decide whether or not somebody has a right.
I understand the argument. You can say that with drugs. You can say that with suicidal individuals. Those are, of course, those are all considered to be defective individuals. We call it different things, but essentially they're defective. They're either afflicted with we call it affliction, or
everything
addiction or something, but it's essentially saying they're defective. Essentially.
Are you ready for bed?
But the thing that really finds it interesting, and I heard that Siri in the background.
I'm glad you recognize her voice, because I only have the other government agent living in the house.
Yeah, I don't have Siri, but I caught that. But I think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting question. It's probably the only time that we'll see philosophers in the 21st century actually have anything important to really decide. There's something for college students that no one's really dealing with. It's like, oh, wow, they have importance again. I don't know where we go with this, but I know the ramifications of it are devastating, which is why we need this conversation.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer. There's no easy answer to this.
No, there isn't. And that's one of the biggest things. And that's one of the reasons why so many people came out. Big tech names came out and said, we need to pause AI because we don't understand the ramifications. We don't understand what can happen. Okay.
Mhm.
I just brought up the 2 times that we've discussed it on this show.
Yeah.
I just brought up some minor things, just some things that came off the top of my head,
Mm-hmm.
and look at the discussions that we've had.
Yeah, because it doesn't just end there. And then that connects to this thing, that connects to the next thing, and where does it end? It doesn't.
And I mean, and we aren't computer scientists.
No.
Okay. That's what makes us even scarier, is why aren't these discussions being had
Well,
by the experts in the field? All I see is, I go through my LinkedIn, and I see all these people that are pushing for AI, promoting AI. Okay, how AI is so great. There are aspects of AI that are great. Don't get me wrong.
Well, AI
But
just
they're
one of my computers, and it wanted to show us the studio.
yeah, I noticed that.
But there are so many things that we need to understand, that we need to know how to control. Okay, I'm not talking about necessarily having more government regulations and so forth on it, as I am us being able to control AI and not allowing AI to control us. And the path that we are going down right now, I see not too far from, not too distant future, AI controlling us.
Well, AI as a function of computers is exponential. Its growth is exponential.
Yeah.
Just like computers have been exponential.
Moore's law.
Yeah. So their basic function is exponential. So whatever's going to happen with them happens very, very quickly. You know, we are literally at, as a comparison, we're at the ENIAC stage. And for those who don't know what ENIAC is, 1950s first computer was called ENIAC. It was the size of a mid-sized corporate office. It's like huge. It was an entire floor of a building. And it had less power in it than most calculators today.
I remember being a kid. My father comes home from work. I had to be 5 or so. And the first precinct in Lower Manhattan was getting its first computer terminal. And my father said to me, and I remember distinctly, because I remember spending the day in the drunk tank to stay out of the way. He asked if I wanted to go to work with him the following day while they brought in the computer system. And it was called the Fat Nelly. I don't know who came up with the name for it or why, but we sat outside and we watched 2 18-wheelers unload like 6 giant boxes and have to use a crane to bring these things up into the building. And I didn't get to see it functioning that day because it took them all day to put the thing together. The thing was enormous. And we're talking about a whole floor that they had this thing. And the cubes that they had were like 4 feet deep, 8 feet long, 6 feet high, and they were like 2 of them packed in every box, and there had to be 12 of them.
And now it's this.
Yeah.
And that blows it away. Any cell phone today is enormous, exponentially.
And 5 years later, I'm 10 years old, and my father and I are going to the computer store to buy my very first Commodore VIC-20.
Yeah.
Which for now is, I mean, by comparison, it's an 18-wheeler to a Matchbox car. You know, if you want to compare those two things. And now, like Steve said, he just held up his phone. Everything that we got is in one of these things now. There's more computing power in one of your phones than all of NASA had when we landed on the moon, if we landed on the moon. But there's more computing power in this thing. And
there's more computing power than was in the space shuttle.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there looking up until about 6-7 months ago. Everybody's heard of artificial intelligence. I mean, there were movies about it made from the time we were all kids. We knew what it means. We know what it would do. We know the warnings that were there. We've been told about it, but I didn't actually see it in existence until about 6 months ago, where actually it started becoming commercially popular. On the internet, you started seeing things about it. I saw a video on YouTube, and it said it was the Batman movie Martin Scorsese made, and it was just a bunch of still shots of a Batman movie that Martin Scorsese made in 1985. And I'm like, Martin Scorsese never made a Batman movie in 1985.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the video.
AI art.
Unfriggin' believable. I could not get, and I'm looking at it and I said, what are they talking about? Now, granted, we know that there was a Superman movie with Nicolas Cage way back when. If you're into comic books and you're into this kind of thing, you've probably seen the video of him, trying out the uniform and everything else. I'm like, okay, they tried doing it. It was cool. So I thought, well, was this the same type of thing?
No, it's AI art.
And it was AI.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, a video started making the rounds on YouTube. You know what an FPS is, a first-person shooter like Call of Duty?
Yeah.
Right.
Some developer is working on one.
Talk at the mic.
Oh, okay. A developer is working on one, and they showed a video of it. And it's like a body-worn camera of a police officer.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Graphics, it looks real. It looks 110%. It looks like you're seeing a cop running through some abandoned building having shootouts with people. It looks
there's a video game based on it.
To the point that people were saying, "Oh, come on, this is just regular video." And the guy actually made a follow-up video where he puts the mouse and he moves stuff around to let you know this is not real. It's all digital, and it looks real.
Well, there was a movie about 7 years ago. I don't know. My frame of mind is never that great when it comes to time frame. But I do remember the movie. It was called Hardcore Henry. And
from that.
It was a movie based
Russian. I think it was Russian too.
Yeah, it was a movie based on the perspective of a first-person shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was this guy in an hour and 45 minutes that the movie was. You don't see his face, you don't see anything. But it's this jam-packed action movie that's all done in one take.
I think they kidnap his girlfriend and he has to get her back. And,
so
it's just him fighting and shooting.
Yeah. So if you're Henry, what would you have seen that day? Mm-hmm. What would it have been like? And they made it look like what they call a one take, where it doesn't break from the action, and it's all done from the perspective of Henry. And it probably took months. It probably took months to put this movie together. It probably cost millions of dollars to put together. Yeah. And here's this first-person shooter game just a few years later that some guy sitting in his house probably took a month to write it.
If you could go on YouTube and find it's you have to do a double take.
Yeah, they have a video game based on that now.
It looks real.
With that same, there's a video game where you're a cop going through training and you're seeing everything as body cam. Yeah.
Unrecord.
Yeah. I've heard about this.
Now,
there it is.
I looked up OpenAI is one of the leading AI developers right now. They're the ones that do ChatGPT and GTP4.
Right.
Okay. And basically they say they're committed to keeping powerful AI safe and broadly beneficial. We know our AI tools provide many benefits to people today. Our users around the world have told us ChatGPT helps increase productivity, enhance their creativity, and offer a tailored learning experience. We also realize that, like any technologies, these tools come with real risks. So we work to ensure safety is built into our system at all levels. Okay. And they go on try to explain some of what they're doing. Okay. This latest model, GPT-4, they only tested for 6 months.
Well, it's
Okay.
longer than the text of the vaccine.
Yeah, that's true.
Very true.
Okay. And they admit that there's only so much that they can learn in the lab. So they use real world experiences. Okay. So AI is learning from the world. Okay. And anybody using Chat GPT must be 18 or 13 and older with parental approval.
well, we know how stringent the
Well, Mike, go back a second.
18 is.
Yeah.
Go back down paragraph. There it is at the top. We do not permit our technology to be used to generate hateful and harassing, violent, or adult content, among other categories. Here's the important line. Our latest model, GPT-4, is 82% less likely to respond to requests for disallowed content. Okay, stop right there. So it is permitted to do the things they just said it can't do. It is doing the things that are disallowed. And that's the part, that's the line that is important in this entire discussion in what they are presenting. And I love this. This is actually a good writer as opposed to most of the things that Joe Biden says. His speechwriter is horrible, or Budweiser's speechwriter, horrible. This is important because they're saying it can't do that. It's like saying that the vaccine was completely safe. You couldn't get the pandemic, you couldn't transmit the pandemic, and you won't die from the pandemic. Those were all lies. And they knew it. And here we are, they're telling us it's not permitted to do anything bad, but it's doing it. They're saying, but it's doing it 12% less than it was doing it in the past. But it's doing it, and it's doing it even though you said it can't. There's a problem. Full stop. Your safeguards, it's like gun control. You're telling me I'm safe, but yet I have empirical evidence that says I'm not. People are still being hurt. You have failed. Full stop. Let's redo this because there's a problem. You know what I mean? And same thing as gun control, same thing as the pandemic. We're seeing you're being told how safe you are and how everything is fine, and then it's not. Yeah, that's the game. That's a video game.
Yeah, I didn't mean to preemptively block that other share screen. I just said I don't know.
No, it's fine.
Stuff. You guys do, but I could run this in the background while we were talking about it.
But this is
the video that's called Unrecord that you can go and watch. Turn it up onto YouTube and look at it. Now, I'm pretty sure I've been in this building at some point. I was thinking I was looking for a cousin of mine. And pretty similar circumstances, but this is incredible.
And one of the smart things they did, I read about, you see the bad guys, their faces are pixelated out like you would see on a TV show.
Yeah.
Which adds the realism of it being a police body worn camera, but at the same time makes it easier for them because one of the hardest things for them to get right is
the face and emotions.
Right.
So you're just getting rid of it.
Well, even if you watch I watch a lot of these body cam videos on things, like crime scene breakdowns and everything, because I'm always looking and critiquing the way the police interact and stuff like that, especially when there's firearms involved. And if you want to subvert a lot of the YouTube algorithms for violence, you have to pixelate faces, you have to pixelate blood. That's why even when you see the things like the trans shooter in that school,
it's all pixelated.
And they show everything's pixelated, not because the news pixelated that, but because the departments pixelated it in order to share the video on social media streaming services like YouTube, Instagram, and everything else, because they know the media is going to pick up on it. And if they didn't do that, the algorithm on YouTube would not allow them to show the video at all. They wouldn't even be granted an exemption as being it's a news source. So this is what they made it easier to do. If they build in a workaround, people are going to exploit that workaround, and then they're going to figure out, how do I make that workaround in my benefit so that it's more convincing?
Well, imagine how they're going to use that kind of technology. Here's another aspect that we haven't talked about, but this video game is pointing out for the future. We can rewrite history. We can rewrite history with art and with people speaking. We can rewrite speeches. We can deny things that have been known forever. And future generations, as the technology gets better and better, generations won't be able to tell the difference.
No, they're already doing an audio AI where they could mimic someone's voice perfectly. They had something with Joe Biden making some ridiculous speech. You could tell it's not him because he's well-spoken and he's not stuttering and stumbling, but it sounds like his voice.
Well, in the video, he's well-spoken. In real life,
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's how you could. That's the only reason you could tell.
It's a natural disqualifier.
But it's his voice. Now you look at this video game. The sky's the limit.
Well,
if they want to show you something that never happened, but you'll believe it happened because it looks real.
Well, there's a video out there right now that reenacts the scene from Titanic where Jack sketches Rose in her suite.
Oh yeah.
And they turn Rose into Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's his face on Rose's body, and it's his voice.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. This deep fake technology, they call it.
Yeah.
There's a channel on YouTube, Control Shift Face.
Yeah.
And he takes popular movies and he did like the Terminator, but with Sylvester Stallone. He put Sylvester Stallone's face on Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you can't tell the difference. The lighting, everything.
Yeah. He came to fame for altering photos. That people would submit him photos and he would just alter them to make the photo look like something completely different. He'd insert things or take things out, and literally could make you look like you're on the moon.
And now that we know, good at it. And now that we know the government, especially our government, we would expect it of China. We would expect it of Cuba if they had the ability. We would expect it of all these third world nations if they had the ability to work with the big tech companies to, for all the stuff that we know they did with suppression of speech. We know that they did with tampering with elections. We know what they did. Had FBI, CIA, NSA, every alphabet group in the government was embedded so deeply at Twitter that they were on the board of Twitter, getting their marching orders directly from the DNC. How long is it going to be before and we only know that this has happened at Twitter. Well, we could only prove that it happened at Twitter. The largest information gathering organization on the face of the planet is Google.
Yes.
They have a monopoly on information.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think for a second that our government is not just as, if not more, embedded into Google as they were with Twitter?
Of course.
They are. So how long is it going to be when you try to find... There's a lot of times I try to look up something that I know I saw, because I have an eidetic memory when it comes to things that I know I saw it. I can recall things. I know what it is. And I go to look for it and I can't find it because it's been scrubbed from the internet. Mm-hmm. Certain speeches, political events, different things that what people say, I know that they've been done. It's one thing for them to scrub it. Okay, you're making it harder to find, but somewhere out there, somebody's got a copy of it on a 3.25-inch floppy disk.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be difficult for government to just decide, well, this was seen too much 30 years ago for the world to have forgotten it. But we can go back in and alter it. And maybe Reagan didn't say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Maybe he said, Mr. Gorbachev, why don't you build another wall? And start changing and teaching an entire new generation of people an entire new set of government approved events as fact and saying this is what really happened.
Change what Lenin said, change what Mao said, change what Hitler said. You can change who gave the speech at Nuremberg. You can change a lot of these speeches throughout history, and most of them don't have video. And now they did. Remember when they did a thing about Lincoln giving the Gettysburg speech, and there were thousands, tens of thousands of people that believed the video of Lincoln giving the Gettysburg speech was real because they're too stupid to know that there was no TV, there was no video back then. Well, imagine a few generations from now.
You know what's also making it easier is the fact that we are now relying less and less on broadcast technology and more on wired technology. And streaming technology. Because the very first broadcast on Earth that got sent into space was the opening ceremonies at the 1936 Olympics
with Hitler.
With Hitler. And if we go back and look at that one movie that Jodie Foster did, Contact. We received the signal back from an alien entity, and what did they send us back? Our first broadcast, which was Hitler. And they were like, "Oh well, that's a hell of a way to send the greeting card back." And there was a code embedded in the video. Once we get to a point where we're no longer using airwaves to broadcast, and all of the broadcast is now being, you need special devices in which to capture and reproduce the broadcast. You have to send it by cables, by wires and everything else because it's a wired technology. We don't have the ability to receive those technologies. Now, there is nothing stopping government entities from being able to coerce the public opinion by just changing whatever they want without you even knowing it. And they can do it with the most subtle little differences. They'll start off with, and we see the media now, a suspect is one color while they lighten or darken it to fit the narrative on the image. We see them doing it. They modify the lighting. I mean, not for nothing. Look at fucking Instagram. Listen, ladies, that filter is not what you look like. It's not what you look like. It's what you think you look like.
But they've already been doing that. Think about it. They've already changed, when I was talking to Dan, they've changed the definition of recession. They changed the definition of man and woman. They've changed definitions of what is a firearm, what is an assault weapon. We're seeing this on a daily basis that literally our language is being rewritten.
I'll be right back, guys.
As well as history. We're rewriting these things. So to say that, they're going to make it, they're just going to continue the process. We're seeing it happening now before our eyes. It's just that people aren't complaining about it. And people are going, well, they changed the definition of recession. Well, Biden's doing okay. The economy's okay. No, we're in a recession. The definition from 1970, I think it was 1974 up until 3 months ago, we're in a depression. The definition of what an assault weapon was historically the same in the 1800s all the way up until 1986 in California. Never changed. And now we have a brand new definition. These things are happening in front of our eyes on a regular basis, but they're done as, we changed the definition of what a man and a woman is. That is intrinsic for the last several dozen millennia of human beings. And today we have 112 different choices, or 82 or 62, depending on the source you want to go to. There's dozens or there's only one. They're doing it in front of our face. And we're not questioning. The problem is, just like most of the things we've talked about today, there's no question. The leadership, the elected individuals are not being challenged, and they're not being questioned, and they're allowed to shut people down when they do ask a question that's legit, that they should be accountable to and answer for us. I mean,
That should the media too.
What's that?
Journalists, so-called journalists, the stuff that they get away with, that they could just lie to you.
How many times have we caught that? How many times have we caught them doing that?
That I've been thinking, I think about a lot. And you heard about it once and then it died. You remember George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
I forget which affiliate it was. Was it ABC, CBS, NBC? I forget who it was. They released the audio recording of him talking to a dispatcher. The original recording was him, and I'm I don't know the exact quotes, but he called. He said, "Yeah, there's a guy walking through the neighborhood. He looks like he's up to no good." The person on the phone said, "What does he look like? Is he white, black, Hispanic?" And Zimmerman answers, "He's black." When this news station played it, they edited out the audio. So basically, it's him saying, "Yeah, there's a guy walking around the neighborhood. He's up to no good. He's black."
CBS, I believe, did it.
Yeah. And nothing ever happened.
It was NBC.
It was NBC.
They apologized. And it was all forgotten. Just like that. It was all forgotten. Oops, sorry. We apologize. It won't happen again.
No, think more recently. The Hunter laptop, 2.5 years. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. Oh, by the way, it's real.
It's real.
Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets forgotten, swept under the rug. But I mean, the whole thing with Zimmerman, it's like they're trying to start a riot. It's like they want to start a riot.
Yeah, NBC literally edited out 8 sentences of context to just get to the he's black.
And basically it was the dispatcher asking,
and
is he white, is he black? And he says he's black. They cut out the dispatcher asking the question.
Yeah.
So they just made it said like Zimmerman just, oh yeah, he's black.
There's a guy over here looking at houses. He's black. That's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
But 75% of the people who heard the recording heard that, because not only did NBC edit the recording, but every talking head that went on television and used NBC's footage of the event used it. Even if the affiliate or the media outlet used it in the context of saying, by the way, NBC edited it and this is what they heard.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the audience heard. If the person turned on the TV and didn't hear that line and just heard Zimmerman's voice, now they're under the impression that it was edited, that's exactly what he said.
Well, we've seen that even more recently. Look at President Trump talking in Charlottesville. They're very fine people, which is so, and everyone knows, anyone who's, the media has come out somewhat afterwards, but to this day, you get Rachel Maddow, you get most of the Democrats in elected office continue to repeat the lie that everyone was very fine people when that's literally not what was said.
Oh,
and we have the transcript as well as the video saying that, but future generations will never know that.
And the other one was that he called all Mexicans rapists and murderers.
Yeah, because the media refused to put up a printed transcript of what he said that would differentiate between THEY apostrophe RE and THIER or EIR. Is it I before E? I don't know. I'm not the best speller.
EIR.
But it would be like it. I rewrote that little thing in a context of products, and I said if they're sending us the worst of the worst. They're sending us this, that. They're sending us their drugs. They're sending us this. They're sending us our murderers. They're sending us their murderers.
Mm-hmm.
If you transposed the word motor into shopping carts and just said shopping carts instead of murderers, would he be calling all Mexican people coming across the border shopping carts? No, because he said they're shopping carts. No, they're not shopping carts. They're people.
Yeah.
They're murderers. They're sending us their rapists, their drug dealers, their murderers.
A possessive, he's using the possessive versus
Because they
descriptive.
opened up the prisons and took the prisoners, put them on buses, and sent them to the border specifically to get them out of their country and send them to ours. But the media says, "Oh, he called all of them murderers. All the Mexican citizens are murderers."
Yeah,
it's insane what they've done, and what's worse off is that
people believe it.
People believe it
till this day.
To this day, they still bring that up all the time. It still has to go out on every friggin' debate, and the people, it's like, are they settling for it? Do they just not care, or they've been so browbeaten into believing it that
no, they've been trained to accept the authority that said, "This is the truth. Don't ask a question." That's the big thing. Don't ask a question. Accept it. It's true because we told you it's true. That's the only answer. And people are accepting that that's the answer because they said so, which has never been acceptable. That's why the Constitution is negative. It is a negative rights for the government. The government can't do things. Why? Because the government will abuse its power every time.
No, I'm going to correct you. The Constitution is permissive, and it only describes what the government is permitted to do. If it was restrictive, then we'd have to define everything the government is not allowed to do.
Fair enough. Good correction. Yes. Yeah. I was incorrect in saying that, but it's meant as the limitations are on the government, not on the people.
Right.
And that's what the document's for.
I'm sitting here. I just pulled up that Trump speech on computer number 4 over here. Here's the Washington Post, USA Today, and MSNBC News, CNN. Every single one of them, THEY, THEY''. Looking at the transcripts of that speech, the transcripts of the speech, which I'm sorry, but isn't the fucking point of the media to be accurate when you're going to quote somebody? Because you can quote somebody or you can paraphrase what they say, but when you use the quotation marks, you're supposed to be speaking accurately. And
so basically he's saying they are rapists.
They are rapists. So if you don't use the contraction of the words in it, there in the possessive is not a contraction. It's a word. There is a contraction of they are. They're quoting his speech as they are. Okay, that's what they're doing now. I don't know if they've retracted or corrected this since then. However, when you go to Google and you look it up, you don't see the correction because the corrections only appear on the back page.
It's worse than you think. It's worse than you think. Literally, if you try and put in Washington Post, Trump, Charlottesville, White House, what the Washington Post isn't showing you is what Trump actually said. They're showing you their version of it. Let me try it a different way. What I'm trying to find is actually the White House text of every time a president speaks in public, the White House provides a transcript every time. And literally, if you put in Trump, Charlottesville, White House, you should get a transcript of his speech. You should have a Google link to the White House and his remarks. Except when you look for that, they don't provide it.
Right.
Google is not showing the White House transcript.
All right. You know what else you can do on Google? A lot of people don't know this, but if you want to find a particular phrase that's in an article that it's embedded in it, put it in quotes.
Yeah.
and find it in the quotes, because you want to be specific with certain searches. That's why sometimes if you look for a phone number and you just put the phone number in there, it'll give you back a mathematical equation, because Google doesn't know whether you're asking for a phone number or what's what plus what plus what. So if you type in the phrase about that particular Trump speech, and you put in quotes the correct spelling of what he actually said, it only comes back as they are, not there. So not only if there are any retractions or corrections made to that story, they're not even findable on Google. You have to remember what he said. You have to know what he said. Another example of that, I'm going to give you a stupid one with how the media turns around, and George W. Bush running for president, when at the first time of the election, he was talking about the trade imbalances between the United States and other countries. And he went on to say, an increasing number of our imports come from overseas. The media fucking lambasted him over that statement. Well, where else are our imports going to come from? 75% of our imports come from Mexico and Canada.
Yeah, I know.
They don't come from overseas. It's called North America. He was talking about the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
And they went off on him. Like, granted, he's not the brightest light bulb in the chandelier, but he's 100% accurate with what he said. He was exactly what he said. And if you talk about it in the context in which he was saying it, you would understand that he was making a valid point as for what our trade situation was. But the media distorts that. And these are the things that you hear it. You may forget it. These are the little seeds that get dropped here and there. You don't really recognize it as for what it is. But now when you have AI having the ability to completely take and rewrite history, and not only print it for you, but verbalize it for you and show it to you on video. I mean, it's not going to be too long before, I'm sure that somewhere in Russia, the Miracle on Ice game was won by the Russians.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's happened at some point. I'm sure that at some point, Nancy Kerrigan didn't get hit with a pipe, or it was Donald Trump killed JFK. I'm sure it'll be something that happens, but it's insane what they're doing in technologies. And if you want to know why government really isn't looking at this through the eyes of the concern that it should, it's because they're probably trying to figure out the best way that they could utilize it to better control the people. So why would they want to put restraints on something that they're going to use in an unrestricted manner to screw over the people, gain more control, expand their reach of power, give themselves a stronger foothold? They're not going to, it's like asking them to write their own term limits. They're not going to do it. They're not going to friggin' do it.
Which is why we need people to be involved. People have to be active in their government and in knowing or investigating beyond just the headline or accepting just one source. Just because the New York Times said it doesn't mean it's true or correct. And you should question that. And you should look for another source. You should always confirm. We have to verify, especially now.
No, exactly. Okay. And we probably should be wrapping this up. We're closing on 2.5 hours now.
Yeah.
So with that, and with Mike's statement, yes, you do have to be involved. And if you can't be directly involved in implementing change in your communities and in your states, get involved with an organization that is working to do such. Okay, and one of those organizations is Liberty First Foundation. You can get involved, and you can get involved with us, and you can also help us further our mission by becoming a premium member of the Liberty First Foundation for $15 a year. And that poster you see behind Frank is for our membership drive. And right now we are working first 250 members, premium members will be entered into a drawing for a custom designed Henry Golden Boy 22 lever action rifle. Great gun. It is customized with the Liberty First Foundation logo on it. So that's one of the things that as a premium member, you will have access to. Other things that you'll have access to as a premium member is premium content or exclusive content. You will be have access to exclusive education, exclusive webinars, which we are going to be starting up. And here in the very near future, we are going to be starting up another project, which is going to be the Restore America project. And a big part of that is going to be education. And some of these educational pieces will be free to members or at a greatly reduced cost to our members compared to non-members. So there's all kinds of things that are going to be beneficial for becoming a member with the Liberty First Foundation. But here's what really matters is we operate out of pocket. And honestly, it's quite expensive for what we do. Okay. When you take website costs, cost of plugins, the cost of streaming services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these costs adds up and it gets quite expensive. And as a result, it doesn't allow us to actually get out there and spread the message beyond what we do here. Now, tonight we've had a pretty good audience on our show, but really, we aren't reaching as many people as we'd like. We would like to start getting in towns and other places to spread this message, but we can't do it without your help. And you can help us by becoming a premium member of the Liberty First Foundation. Along with that, as a premium member, it says that you want us to represent your voice in our discussions. Okay, and we have discussions with politicians all the time. Michael has a lot of discussions with politicians. I do as well. And when we say that we belong to the Liberty First Foundation, we say we have X number of members, the larger that number is, the more likely the politician that we're talking to is going to listen to us. Because let's face it, politicians are in it to get reelected. Mm-hmm. And if they're not listening to the people that are talking to them, odds are they're not going to be reelected. So with that, I want to say thank you to everybody who's in the show tonight. Everybody who's in the chat. I think it was a great show. There is a lot of things that we as a nation need to start looking at. We need to start talking about and having serious discussions about. One of the big things that we talked about tonight is AI. But one of the bigger things I think we need to really start having a discussion as a nation is the role of government. And that is something that is critical right now, and is something that we really need to have a serious discussion about in this country. Right now, we have changed what the role of government is, and they are more our overlords instead of being our servants, and that needs to change. So that's a discussion that we all need to start having, and we need to start understanding. Okay, they say you can't fight government. Well, that's been proven false. time and time throughout history. Okay. And our nation was built on standing up against government. We need to start doing that again today. And we need to start putting government back in its proper role. With that, I want to say we are here every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we welcome you to join in the chat and join in the discussion. And now we have a call-in line that you can join into in discussion with. If you'd like to be in the show, get a hold of either Frank or I, and we will definitely get you on the show. You can get a hold of us through our Facebook profile or Facebook messengers, or you can get a hold of us through the Liberty First Foundation website at l1f.us. Okay. Make sure to like, follow, and share our content. And make sure you subscribe so that you'll be notified whenever we're live. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week.
And be here next week, because I'm going to introduce something next week that is going to set the internet on fire.
Oh, there we go.
I have got, I don't want to take your thunder, Michael, but I want to tease this for next week, because this is something I've been working on for a little bit of time. I plan on turning the woke mob completely inside out, completely upside down. They're going to pull their own hair out, not know what to do, because they are going to be posed with a question next week they cannot answer.
That sounds
and
like
I'm talking about something that is going to be so ridiculously controversial that I seriously doubt anybody outside of myself and my comrades here would even have the balls to share the idea. Something very, 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 very serious. You might have seen it because I talked about it on a live broadcast on my personal Facebook page last week, but I decided I was going to bring it to the masses. Now, this is not speaking for the L1F in the regards of the idea, but the principles behind it. The idea is strictly mine, so I'll take the heat for it because I kind of dig that, but it's gonna be crazy. So if you know people that are woke and you want to piss them off, or at least give them something to think about, and use one of the few pieces of gray matter they have left, join us next week, because the scenario that I'm going to put forth is horrible. It is the worst possible thing I could possibly come up with, but it's going to ask some extremely thought-provoking questions that I want a couple of people from the woke mob to join us here and honestly try to answer it without going through the litany of name calling. I want them to be intellectually honest, answer the question that I'm going to pose, because this is going to challenge the foundation of their belief system to its core, all the way down to its core. And if this doesn't start drawing that line of where your morality is and where your humanity is, you're going to have to really stop, take a look, and decide whether or not this is the avenue that you should continue to stay on. So I'll leave it with that on behalf of myself. Oh, and speaking of subscribing, when you go to the l1f.us page and you go down to the bottom, you're going to see a whole bunch of different names and companies and organizations that we have partnered with over the years. Please do us all a favor and visit their websites, their YouTube channels, Facebook channels, Instagram, and all the rest of that. Take the initiative, go visit them, show them some support, like, share, subscribe, follow, whatever the whole doodad it is that we do over there, and let them know that you found them because you found us. They, I'm sure, would appreciate the response, and the better we look, we'll actually, who knows, maybe get some of them to come on the show more often too. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Steve, you want to say anything to sign yourself out?
As much as you think you might hate the media, it's not enough.
It's not enough. You got to hate them a little bit more. Dig down into that reservoir of disgust and pull an extra bucket out. Vas, you want to give us a sign out?
Folks, we thank you for having open minds and open opinions, that you question us and you question yourself. We thank you for the fact that you believe in freedom and liberty. We thank you for being Americans, and for those overseas, for listening to Americans have these conversations so that you can take those kernels and make liberty a reality in your country, in your home. Because the more free each of us are, the better a world we all get to enjoy. I thank you for taking the time to be with us. I thank all of my friends here and Dan Wass for joining us, because this is worthwhile because you were part of it. I thank you.
And Dale, congrats on the new employment. Wishing you well. I hope the letter of referrals that we sent helped. Apparently it did. So, all right. So on behalf of myself, Steve, Michael, Dan, Jan, and Jeremy, who we hope one day shows back up here on the show. It gets his act together over there out in wherever the hell he lives out there in Utah. You guys all be safe, shoot straight. Like I said, we love you guys. Take it easy. You guys have a great night.
As well.